Hello guys, in this video I'm going to be painting this Modelcollect Fist of War E-60 paper panzer in 1/35th scale. In a previous video I built this kit and been fairly ambivalent towards the level of detail, but I did add my own metal protection for the engine deck and some side skirts too. Being a paper panzer, I've got a wide leeway in terms of camo schemes. I wanted to go with something along the lines of late World War II German camo, so a base coat of olive green. But I'm also quite a fan of splinter camo schemes, so I wanted to do something along those lines as well. I started by giving a slight pre-shade with XF1 black to certain areas, particularly the engine deck grills and around the tools, so that if any of the later camouflage paint missed those areas, we wouldn't be looking down into the grey plastic. The first job was to lay down a fairly light coat of Dunkelgelb. I looked at my three AK real colours variations of this and wasn't particularly happy, so in the end I went for Tamiya XF60 mixed with XF57 buff to lighten it up. It was only once I had the Dunkelgelb down on everything that I could actually glue the wheels into place. And as you can see here, the attachment points for the wheels are not particularly strong, and during this whole painting process I would knock several of them off several times. Before I attach them, however, I wanted to give a steel coat to the outer rim, because they're steel road wheels. There are a couple of ways you can do this. A pencil is quite a common way, but I decided to go for these metallic steel pigments and do a combination of rubbing them on with a cotton bud and running the wheel through the pigments, all while getting my hand in the way of the camera to throw the focus out. With this technique you can get a decent sheen on the wheels without making them really reflective and silvery. You can see the result there on the inner road wheels when they're in place. The outer road wheels are slightly easier to attach because they do actually end up touching the inner ones, and so you've got a few more contact points to glue them in position. No option on this kit to have these wheels rotating, by the way. I did put one or two wheels in the Rotbraun red primer, as if they'd just come from the factory without being painted, but in general I wanted to avoid that tanks being deployed in red primer myth that we sometimes see propagated. Before I could attach and therefore paint the side skirts, I had to build up the tracks. We get 3 sprues like this, so Lincoln length tracks. There's not too much to say about them really. They seem to go together fairly well. They do come very close to my side skirts, but that's not really the kit's fault because obviously the side skirts are an addition that I made. The other thing to notice is that all the track sprues are the same, but the tracks are not symmetrical. If you notice here, the part of the track on the lower half of the screen is wider than the other side, i.e. those two guide teeth there, guide horns there, are not central. And that of course means that you basically have to rotate the track for the other side of the tank, and so the tracks on one side of the tank are facing backwards. The instructions does not acknowledge this, and it does say that there are instances of this in archive reference photos, which is true. Or at least it's true for other tanks, of course. It's not true for this because it's a paper panzer. But it is something to bear in mind, and of course it does mean when you build up those lengths they only go on a certain side. Next it was time to mask off some of the yellow, as I wanted this to basically be a olive green base coat with thin lines of yellow, creating a splinter scheme with a couple of areas which are the dark red-brown colour, not the primer red-brown. To do this masking I used a combination of the wider 10mm Tamiya tape and the thinner, I think it was 2 or 3mm tape. For a bit of extra variation I occasionally overlaid a couple of strips of the tape so that the edges of the yellow stripes were not parallel. The sloped surfaces, like the front here, and the vertical surfaces, like the sides, are quite easy to do. I wasn't quite sure how to approach the horizontal surfaces. I did consider just leaving them green with no camo, but in the end I did extend the splinter pattern onto them, for better or for worse. I still couldn't attach the side skirts permanently at this stage because the tracks weren't in place, so I used the masking tape, which would mask off the camo scheme, to temporarily hold those side skirts into place. It is surprisingly hard to get a random pattern when you do things like this. And what I really wanted to avoid was making everything sort of like a star shape, with the center of the turret being the center of the star, everything sort of pointing towards the center there. And I tended to naturally gravitate towards that and had to sort of force myself to avoid it. So here I am making just a few adjustments to my final version, or my final first version. Then I took my AK Real Colours paints, so the olive green and the red brown, and applied them to the model. These paints are lovely, they always come out with a really nice finish. And this is what the model looked like once I'd done that. But the proof would be in the removal of the masking tape. As I did that, I was really pleased the way this front panel came out. Not just from a technical point of view with the nice straight lines, but just something about that camo really looked nice to me. It looks kind of aggressive, I think, doesn't it? Suits the tank. Here it is with all the masking tape removed, and I was generally fairly happy with this for just a couple of areas. One thing that was clear is that the 10mm masking tape didn't look good. The big thick yellow lines, no, it's just not right. In particular here on this fifth side skirt next to the red primer one, I don't know what I did there, I messed something up, so I needed to go back there and just correct that and get a better shape there, because it just didn't quite look the way I wanted it to look. Equally on the other side, the front two side skirts look fine. Not super happy with the thick line in yellow, but it's okay. But this side skirt here, I'm not quite sure what I was thinking about having this yellow pattern just stop like that. So again, I masked that up and repainted it to make it look a bit more pleasing to the eye. Here you can see that first example once it's been fixed. I've put an upside down brown triangle there. I couldn't resist having at least one side skirt in red primer. And there we go, I think that looks a little bit better. There's a bit of paint run there, but that will look okay, I think. It looks better than the yellow triangle I had, I think. And then on the other side, here is that fixed yellow rectangle. Again with an upside down brown triangle on it. And I think that looks a bit better, especially with the other side skirts next to it. The latex glove as a tarp was working quite well, despite the fact that some of the primer had peeled off it. I guess with a flexible surface like latex, that's always a risk. I painted it with US Camo Green, I think this is, from Vallejo Modelcollect. Probably not the greatest of choices of colours because it blends in quite well with the vehicle itself, which obviously is desirable in the field, but in terms of a model it really does lose that visual interest. We've got a couple of magazines there, cylindrical magazines for the machine gun, which is going to go on the turret. They were from a Tamiya weapon set, German infantry weapon set. Then it was detail painting time, and I made the old Vallejo metal colour steel go a long way, using it for the spare track links on the turret. It's quite a thin paint here, so you have to be careful not to get too much on your brush, or you will end up flicking specks of it across the turret surface when you hit details. I use the same steel paint for the tow cables and most of the tools, including the barrel cleaning rods here, which shouldn't be steel and which I went back and corrected later on. I always instinctively go for painting these steel for some reason. They should be wood, I believe, with a brass end. It's amazing how painting things like the tools just brings the model to life a little bit. Just small details, but it really makes it look more three-dimensional. At this point I gave the model a coat of VMS matte varnish, which gives a lovely strong, really super matte finish, but is no good for applying the decals, which I had completely forgotten about until this point. I toyed with the idea of having no decals. I also toyed with the idea of just spraying some decals, but in the end I raided my spare decals bag, applied gloss varnish where I wanted them to go down, applied them, and there were only a few because that seemed to be the trend towards the end of World War II. Then I matte varnished again over the top. Here are the tracks having been painted in Tamiya XF84, which is dark iron. I know the tracks are not iron, but the model shop accidentally sent me 2 bottles of this when I ordered something else, so I've got plenty of it to use up, and it's a nice colour. It'll be a nice colour for weathering of the dust and dirt of the urban scene that this is going to go in. The tracks were fixed with superglue, followed by the side skirts, and then we've got our completed vehicle in its initial painting. Straight away I went on to the weathering. This is quite a thick pin wash made with Entwicklung 502 sepia oil paint. As you can see, this really helps bring out the details, particularly here on the engine grills, but on any of the features, the hatches and so on, all around the turret and the main vehicle. You can see because of the matte varnish that this is somewhat seeping into the surrounding area, but that's absolutely fine. I come back later and I blend that in with a ever so slightly dampened brush. On an armour model like this, I think this helps to sort of dirty up the surface a little bit and make it look a bit more used. Although at this point I'd decided not to do a diorama or a base for this model, I had still decided that I wanted it to be weathered like it was fighting in an urban environment. So that meant quite light, quite dusty tones, perhaps lots of brickwork tones, things like that. Initially I started with a light dust coat. This is made from Tamiya XF52 Flat Earth and XF19 Sky. Mixed very thin, applied more heavily on the lower half of the vehicle than the upper half. I made sure to apply it quite extensively here to the tracks as well. Next up I decided to use some pigments. I went for asphalt road dirt, European earth and brick dust, though ultimately I didn't use the darkest one here, the asphalt road dirt. Now I'm not super confident using pigments, I just can't seem to get quite the right result, but practice makes perfect, although in this case it didn't. I started by applying the pigments dry onto the wheels, but unfortunately there wasn't really enough surface area, even with a matte varnish, for the pigments to bite into. So we do get some discoloration here, but not really the texture that I was looking for. You can build these up here and add pigment fixer, but the problem is when I've done that before is that it tends to lose the texture and look a bit more like wet mud, even when it's dry. I then tried adding some pigments mixed with some odourless thinner. Now of course this looks a lot darker than it really will be because it would dry out, but again you have to be very careful to spread them out, otherwise you tend to get a texture that looks a bit like wet mud. This is the darker brick pigment. Then I added the earth pigment on top, dry this time because there was still plenty of thinner on the wheels. While that was drying, I used some pigments direct onto the tracks. This is the European earth, and again because you've got that texture on the tracks, the pigments just fall into it and bite into it quite naturally, so I felt no need to fix it there. Now this is what the pigments on the wheels looked like after they dried, and I wasn't super happy with them. Again, they don't really have that dusty effect, that dusty texture. They look a bit too much like they've been through wet mud that's now dried, rather than the dusty look I was going for. In fact, to be honest, the whole tank does look a little bit too clean, and I feel a little bit like I haven't really achieved my vision for this. But then on the other hand, I feel like I've lost my vision for it a little bit as well, and I'm not quite sure what I want to do with it. So with that in mind, I decided to call this finished for now, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to come back to this at a later date and maybe integrate it into a base or something, get a bit more rubble and dust and stuff going on. But I'm not really feeling it right now, and I'm not really sure what I would do to it. So rather than risk mucking it up, I'm going to leave it how it is and show you some final pictures. So there we go guys, that was my painting and weathering of the Fist of War E-60 paper panzer from Modelcollect. I kind of went in a circle with this kit. I was really excited when I bought it. Then during the construction phase I was just a bit sort of ambivalent really. It wasn't a fantastic kit, but I'm really pleased with the result here. I really like the base olive green. I really like the splinter camouflage, and I think it's a nice what if look without being too outlandish. Originally I had planned to make a diorama base for this, but then I just didn't really feel like it. It wasn't really drawing me in, and I try to only model if I'm really in the mood for it. So I might come back into it another time, but at the moment, yeah, I'm feeling okay about just leaving it as it is. This is another one of my ongoing projects that I've managed to tick off and get onto the shelf. I've been quite disciplined so far in January. I'm trying not to start anything new until I've got the old things done. I've got two fairly large dioramas that are in progress, both of which you've seen before. One is for the LCM3 and one is the Ardennes workshop diorama. Those are going to get the focus of my time over the next few weeks, and of course I've still got the Prince of Wales, which needs to have its PE railings added, and then of course that camouflage scheme. So plenty to keep me busy, and that's before I start on any new projects for 2024. I would like to say thank you to all of you for watching. Your ongoing support is massively appreciated. And special thanks to my YouTube members and Patreon supporters. These guys support the channel every month, and I'm really grateful for that, guys. Thank you so much. I hope all of you have enjoyed this video. I hope to see you in the next one, and until then, have fun modelling.